Call came in at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had just poured my first cup of coffee and set it on the counter to cool, the way I always do, and I remember watching the steam curl up toward the ceiling when my phone buzzed against the tile. I almost didn't pick up. I figured it was a robocall or maybe the hardware store confirming my order of fence posts. But I saw my grandson's name on the screen, Caleb, and I answered. He was 17 at the time. Caleb didn't call me in the mornings. He texted. Kids his age don't call unless something is wrong, Grandpa. His voice was tight, like he was trying to sound calm and not quite pulling it off. I'm here, I said. What's going on? A pause. I heard him breathe. Don't wear your flannel work jacket today. The brown one with the torn pocket. Just please don't wear it. I can't explain right now, but please. I stood there in my kitchen holding the phone, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Caleb, it's not even 7 in the morning. What are you, Grandpa? Please, just trust me. Don't wear it. And then he was gone. I set the phone down next to my coffee and stood there for a long moment. I'm 68 years old. I've been through 2 recessions, a divorce, a bypass surgery, and the kind of slow grief that comes from watching a farm die one season at a time. I don't rattle easily, but something in my grandson's voice that morning, the shakiness under all that forced calm, settled into my chest like a stone. I left the brown jacket on the hook by the back door and drove into town in my canvas field coat instead. By 9:30, I understood why. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing who we are and how we got here. My name is Roy Hutchins. I've lived in Harlan County, Kentucky my whole life. 68 years, give or take a few months I spent in Lexington after my first marriage fell apart and I needed somewhere to be that wasn't home. I came back, the way people from small counties always come back, because the land gets into you whether you want it to or not. I own 32 acres out on Clover Ridge Road. It's not much by some standards, but it's paid for. My father broke his back on it, and I broke mine after him. And somewhere in the middle of all that breaking, it became something worth protecting. I have one son. His name is Dennis. He's 41 now, and for most of his life, he was the kind of man I was proud of. Steady. Reliable. He worked with me on the property until he was in his late 20s. Then got a job managing a building supply warehouse over in Harlan proper. Good job. Decent money. He met his wife, Renata, about 12 years ago at a church function, and they got married the following spring. I want to be careful how I talk about Renata. I want to be fair, because fair is what I owe the truth, even when the truth is ugly. Renata is intelligent. That much I'll say without hesitation. She is the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately calculates the distance between where she is and where she wants to be. I don't think she's incapable of warmth. I've seen her be genuinely warm with people she considered useful. But underneath all of it always was an accounting, a ledger. What comes in, what goes out, what's owed. She never lied to me. She was too smart to show it plainly, but I felt it in the small things. The way she'd redirect conversations away from me at family dinners. The way she asked questions about my property in that particular tone. Casual on the surface, something sharper underneath. The way she once said, during a Christmas gathering, that it was a shame a piece of land like this doesn't have more done with it. I let it go. You learn to let things go when you get older. You pick your battles because you know how many you have left. Caleb is Dennis and Renata's son, their only child. He spent most of his summers with me from the time he was 6 years old, helping with the garden, following me around the property, sitting on the porch in the evenings while I told him stories about his grandfather and his great-grandfather and the land they'd worked. Caleb is the reason I keep going some mornings. That's the plain truth of it. The trouble started, or at least became visible, about 2 years before that phone call. I'd had a mild stroke in the spring, nothing catastrophic. I could still walk, still talk, still think clearly, but it put me in the hospital for 4 days and it scared Dennis. I understood that. It scared me too, if I'm being honest. 68 isn't old by most measures, but a stroke at 68 is the universe tapping you on the shoulder. What I didn't understand at first was what Renata took from that experience. Within a month of my coming home from the hospital, she had started a campaign, and campaign is the right word, because it was organized and it was persistent, to convince Dennis that I needed help managing my affairs, financial affairs, specifically. She used words like protection and oversight and making sure nothing falls through the cracks. She brought up the stroke every time, the way you use a crowbar, steadily in the same spot until something gives. Dennis mentioned a power of attorney. I said I wasn't ready for that conversation. He let it drop, but Renata didn't let things drop. Over the next year, there were visits, always with some reasonable excuse, a dropped-off casserole, a broken fence they'd noticed driving by, and always, eventually, a circling back to the subject of my long-term plans. There were suggestions that maybe the acreage was too much for one man. There were referrals to a financial planner, a friend of Renata's, who she said specialized in estate management for seniors. The word seniors landed like a thumb on a bruise. I went to the financial planner once. His name was Doyle. He had an office above a sandwich shop in Harlan, and he spent 40 minutes asking me questions about my assets and 0 minutes asking me what I actually wanted for my future. I didn't go back. Renata brought up the power of attorney again at Thanksgiving. I said no again, but this time there were 3 of us at the table and only my voice saying no, and the silence after felt different than it had before. After that dinner, I called my own lawyer, a woman named Patricia who'd handled my father's estate and my own affairs for 20 years. I told her what was happening. She listened carefully, the way good lawyers do. And then she said something I've turned over in my mind many times since. "Roy," she said, "the fact that you're calling me right now, that's the most important thing you've done in months. Keep your affairs in order. Keep your documents up to date and don't sign anything without calling me first. Anything." I promised her I wouldn't. The morning Caleb called, I had been awake since 5. I do most mornings. Sleep gets lighter as you get older, like everything else. I'd already been out to check on the chickens and walk the fence line along the south field, which is a thing I do out of habit more than necessity. A way of touching the land first thing, confirming it's still there. After Caleb's call, I drove into Harlan to pick up some hardware I'd ordered at Henson's Feed and Supply. I was in the parking lot, still sitting in my truck, when my phone rang again. This time it was Dennis. His voice was wrong in a way I couldn't name at first. Too careful, the way someone sounds when they're reading off a script they'd memorized but aren't sure they believe. "Dad, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly." "I'd never answered you any other way. Where were you last night, between 8 and midnight?" I told him. I was home. I ate dinner around 6:30 to leftover chicken stew, watched the news, read for a while, went to bed around 9:30. The same evening I've had 100 times. Can anyone confirm that? Something cold moved through me. "Dennis, what happened?" The pause that followed was the longest 4 seconds of my recent life. "There was an incident last night, out on Route 38, near the old Blevins property. A man was found. He's alive. He's going to be okay. But he was assaulted, and when they found him, he was wearing..." Dennis stopped. Started again. "He was wearing a brown work jacket with a torn left pocket. And the witnesses who called it in said the man who ran from the scene was older, gray-haired, heavy-set. I am 68 years old. Gray-haired, heavy-set." I sat in that parking lot for a moment with the phone pressed to my ear and the sound of my own breathing very loud in my head. "Dennis," I said slowly. "Who found that man? Who called the police?" Another pause. "Renata did," he said. "She was driving home from her book club." I called Patricia before I'd even started my truck. She told me not to speak to anyone, not the police, not Dennis, not anyone, without her present. She told me to come to her office that afternoon and bring my phone, with all recent calls intact. She told me to stay calm. I was calm. That's the thing nobody ever believes about me afterward. I was very, very calm because I have lived 68 years on this earth and I have learned the difference between panic and clarity. And what I felt sitting in that parking lot was not panic. It was clarity. Cold and bright and sharp, like creek water in November. I thought about Caleb's phone call. Don't wear your brown flannel jacket today. He had known. Somehow that boy had known. I didn't hear from Caleb until the following evening. He came out to the house alone, drove himself, which he'd only been doing for a few months, and he sat down at my kitchen table and he told me what he knew. He was 17, but he looked younger sitting there. He'd been holding something for a while and you could see the weight of it in the set of his shoulders. He told me that 3 weeks earlier, he'd been at his parents' house looking for a phone charger in his mother's home office. He found it, and while he was crouched down behind the desk, his mother walked in. She didn't see him at first. She was on the phone, and she was talking in a low, quick voice, the way people talk when they don't want to be heard. He caught pieces of it. A name. Doyle, the financial planner, the word timeline. The phrase, if the old man won't sign voluntarily. And then, it just needs to look like he's not capable of managing things on his own. One incident. That's all it takes. Caleb held his breath behind that desk and didn't move until she left the room. He hadn't known what to do with it. He was 17 and she was his mother, and the information sat inside him like a splinter he couldn't reach. He told his school guidance counselor in vague terms, "What do you do when you think someone in your family might be doing something wrong?" And the counselor told him to talk to a trusted adult. He'd been watching the house when he wasn't at school. His mother's car. The hours she came and went. He'd started to notice patterns, and the night before he called me he had seen, from the window of his room, his mother take something from the back of her car, a brown jacket, bundled under her arm, and carry it inside. He put it together faster than any adult gave him credit for. Patricia moved quickly once Caleb gave his statement. The man who had been assaulted on Route 38 was a day laborer named Marcus, who had done work around the county for years. He had, in fact, done a few jobs for me the previous summer, putting up a new storage shed, patching the barn roof. He knew me, and someone had known that he knew me, and had known roughly what I looked like, and had put my jacket on him. The security camera at the Henson's parking lot, the one I'd been sitting in front of when Dennis called, had footage of my truck from the previous evening as well, when I dropped off a returned item after 5 o'clock. That footage, combined with my phone's location data and a neighbor's account of seeing my lights on and my truck in the driveway throughout the night, accounted for my whereabouts. Renata had not anticipated that the man she'd paid would be identified so quickly, or that he would talk. He did talk, quickly and completely, once he understood the charges he was facing. Her arrangement with Doyle unraveled at roughly the same speed. He had advised her, in writing, that a documented pattern of erratic behavior or a single significant incident connected to my name would strengthen a petition for guardianship. He had meant it academically, as these things sometimes are discussed. Renata had taken it as instructions. The Kentucky courts do not look kindly on manufactured evidence in guardianship proceedings. Patricia made sure of that. Dennis called me 2 weeks after Renata was arrested. It was the first time we'd spoken since the morning in the parking lot. I let it ring twice before I answered, which is as petty as I'll admit to being. He was crying. Not the controlled kind of crying, but the kind that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that breaks through all the composure a man builds up over 40 years. He kept saying he hadn't known, and I believe him. I have spent a lot of time with that belief, turned it over, examined it from different angles. I believe him. What I said to him was this: "I know you didn't know, Dennis. But you also weren't paying attention, and those aren't the same thing, but they're not completely different either. He didn't have an answer to that. Neither did I fully. It's the kind of thing that doesn't resolve so much as it settles over time into something you can live alongside. He's not living with Renata anymore. I don't know all the details and I haven't asked. He's renting a place in town, about 10 minutes from where Caleb goes to school. They have dinner together most Tuesdays. That's what I know. There's a hook by my back door where I used to hang that brown flannel jacket. It's empty now. I got rid of the jacket after the investigation was finished. Not because it felt sinister to look at, but because it had become a thing that meant too many things, and I didn't want to carry all of that every time I reached for a coat. I bought a new one. Dark green canvas, heavy duty. It hangs there now, and on mornings when I go out to walk the fence line, I put it on without thinking about any of this. But I think about Caleb. I think about a 17-year-old boy crouched behind his mother's desk with his heart in his throat, holding a secret that must have felt impossible. Watching for 3 weeks to make sure he had it right before he called me at 6:47 in the morning with a shaking voice and said, "Please just trust me." I think about what kind of person you have to already be at 17 to do that. He comes out on weekends when he can. We don't talk about that year much. We talk about the property, about what needs fixing, about whether we should expand the garden this spring. Last fall, I started teaching him how to read a deed and a property survey, because someday this land is going to be his, and I want him to know exactly what he has. He pays attention the way his grandfather taught me to. Quietly, completely, without making a show of it. People have asked me since all of this came out, whether I feel angry, whether I feel foolish for not seeing it sooner, whether I feel old. Here's what I tell them. 68 is not old. Not the way people use that word when they mean diminished. Not the way Renata and her financial planner used it when they looked at me and saw a problem to be managed, an asset to be repositioned, a signature waiting to be obtained. 68 is a man who has spent nearly 7 decades learning how the world works, who has made enough mistakes to know what they cost, who has built something. 32 acres, a son, a grandson, with his own hands and his own choices. They mistook my patience for passivity. They mistook my age for incompetence. They mistook my trust in my family for a weakness they could use. Every single one of those mistakes was theirs. I'm still here. The land is still mine. And on Tuesday nights, my son drives 10 minutes to have dinner with his kid, which is 10 minutes less than it used to be. And maybe that's the thing that costs the most to look at clearly. Not what Renata tried to take from me, but what her choices took from all of us that we won't ever get back. But the boy is good. The boy is steady and smart and pays attention. Some mornings I walk out to that fence line in the grey early light, and I think, not bad, Roy. Not bad at all. I've had a lot of time to think about what really happened. Not just the legal parts, not just the arrest and the court filings and the investigation, but the whole shape of it. Why it started, how it moved, what made it end the way it did. People want to say it was luck, that I got lucky because Caleb happened to be in that office, happened to crouch behind that desk, happened to hear the right words at the right moment. And maybe there's something to that. But I've lived 68 years, and I've noticed that luck rarely shows up on its own. It tends to find people who were already paying attention. Renata built her plan on a simple assumption, that I was diminished. That age had softened me into something that could be managed, steered, signed over. She looked at my grey hair, and my quiet mornings and my 32 acres, and she saw an opportunity, not a person. That assumption was the first mistake, and it was the one everything else grew from. Because when you underestimate someone, you stop watching them carefully. You stop accounting for the people who love them. You stop wondering what a 17-year-old boy might notice when the adults in his life stop paying attention to each other. Caleb noticed. He noticed because I had spent 11 summers teaching him to notice, to walk a fence line slowly, to look at what's actually there instead of what you expect to see, to sit with something uncomfortable until you understand it well enough to act on it. I didn't teach him those things so he could protect me someday. I taught them because they're worth knowing, But the teaching came back around. The way things do when they're real. What I keep coming back to is this. Renata made her choices over a long period of time. Small ones at first, then larger ones, each one making the next one easier to justify. That's how it works. You don't wake up one morning and decide to frame someone. You make 100 smaller decisions first, to prioritize what you want over what's right. To treat a person as a problem rather than a father. To let a financial planner's careful language become a blueprint. By the time she carried that jacket to her car, she had already crossed so many lines that one more probably didn't feel like much. I don't say that to excuse any of it. I say it because understanding how something happened is not the same as forgiving it, and I think it's important to know the difference. Understanding is how you protect yourself. Forgiveness is a separate decision made on its own timeline, if it gets made at all. Dennis is still working through his part in it. Not the crime, he had no part in that. But the years of not looking closely enough at what was happening in his own house. That's his to carry, and I won't carry it for him. What I will do is keep the door open, because he's my son and because Caleb needs his father, and because I have enough years behind me to know that people can change if the circumstances force them to be honest. The 32 acres are still mine. The fence line still needs walking every morning. The coffee still needs to cool before I drink it. Some things stay exactly as they were. And some things, a jacket on a hook, a version of your family you thought you understood, turn out to have never quite been what they looked like from the outside. I'm still here. That's enough for now.